Then it's bounded on the backside by a 400-acre sort of unofficial elk preserve. And then that's bounded up by a lot of private industrial timberlands. And so we have this wonderful wildlife corridor that, you know, our property is connected to. So and then we have that forest farm edge kind of property, you know, with the pasture and the forest. So we get such a diversity of animals. It's really lovely. We have elk and deer and bear and cougar and no otters. There is a stream, but it's a little ways away.
So we're bounded on two sides by the Forest Service, the river on one side, and then private ownership on our east boundary. So we're at the end of a road, and it actually has the water, the spring water. There's several different homes here, and all of them are off of a spring that's just up above us. We have water rights on two little streams that flow through the place, but it was ranked as Oregon's #1 private water system. It's an incredible little, the water is just spectacular.
It's just a little private utility.
It's all homeowner ran. We all subsidize it, and it's really, really quite something.
That's very cool.
We did have bear chew up some of the water pipes here a couple months ago, so there was some repair there. But no, all in all, it's really pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, that does sound nice. We're waiting for a few more folks to join us. We have the Sandy Ridge elk herd that comes through our property, and they always would knock down their back heels would get on the barbed wire, and they'd pull the fences down of our property and the neighbor's property. And so we got together and we put up a little hog panel gate, you know, that just when we know they're coming through, we just flip it down. And it's made and they were like, they're smart. They're like, oh, well, we'll go here. And it's just been great. So we have so other neighbors have picked up on that and said, hey, that's a good idea, as opposed to replacing your fences all the time.
We did a similar thing down here, Jamie. The deer and elk were always coming through the fence. So I just made 2 walkways, and it's pretty amazing. They found them, or they do utilize them rather than jumping.
Yeah, they do. They figure out, those pathways are smart. Hi, Kelly.
Hi there.
Hi, Tyler. Hi. Hi, Brenda. And Jim, hello.
Hi.
Shannon, glad you could join us. Brian, good to see you again. Hello, Jill. Mary, I'm glad you're here as well. And Kyle, good to see you. Good to know you're here. I don't see you, but good to know you're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
There you are.
I don't know. I can't remember. Lauren was going to be late to something this week. I can't remember if it's this or not. So.
Well, she's not here yet. There's Quinn. And I don't know if Bob's joining us or not. You do know if Bob's joining us,
Yeah,
Quinn?
he is. Yes.
Great. Awesome. I know he's been traveling. Okay, so I think, Sam, if I'm counting right, maybe we're only missing Bob?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay. All right. And there he is. Awesome. So we've got a full house. Okay, well, and for our viewing public, we're being live streamed. Welcome, everybody. This is our December 7th Trap Check work group meeting. We are streaming live. We're going to go until 4:30 today. We agreed at the last meeting to have this meeting go just a little bit longer, see if we could make some headway on some potential recommendations that the group could support. And so let's go ahead and go to our next couple slides and we can get going. Zoom meeting tips, same as always, same ones we've been using. You can see where you can remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking, to cut down on background noise. And it's nice if you can be on video. We always appreciate that, but we understand folks need to step away. Go ahead and go to the next one. And again, I think everybody's got themselves named, and that's always helpful, particularly for our live stream, so they know who all of you are. And it is helpful if you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, but of course, I'm on the lookout for an actual hand, so you can feel free to do that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And I don't think we need that one. Go ahead and go to the next one. Everyone's named. All right, here we are. So our agenda, what we talked about at the last meeting. So last meeting, we got a little bit wrapped around the axle. We had a presentation that we were going to have from Brian White with the author of the BMPs, and then he had some travel issues, and so he didn't show. And we talked about what questions we wanted to raise for a future potential presentation from Brian, and then we all decided that let's get going on ideas for recommendations, and we can consult with Brian later, and so he might join us at a future meeting, and then we started talking about how much more information and data we needed. And there were some suggestions about, that there's a study, we need some more information about animal welfare and animal suffering. And there was a lot of conversation about whether or not we actually really needed that in order to have a good discussion about, emerging recommendations. And so there was a sense in the group that it's time to get at it. We need to start talking about what's on people's minds. We've got a body of work behind us over the last few meetings where we've explored a number of different topics that could help inform some potential recommendations. But the meeting today is really focused on, hopefully people have come with ideas for recommendations that they think the group might be able to support given the information that's come before. So that's really the kind of setting the stage for where we are for the meeting today. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So the meeting guidelines, same ones we've been using all along. It's, I'm going to assume people have come prepared, that you've had a chance to look at the meeting summary from the previous meeting. I did give a little thumbnail of what we talked about at the last meeting. We ask that folks fully participate, in the work group meetings, participate in an open and mutually respectful way. That can be challenging when we disagree, but we do ask that you do your best. And I'll do my best to moderate that and help to keep a tone of civility in the meetings. I think people have done a good job with that, but it is difficult sometimes when you hear things that you really strongly disagree with. So maybe take a deep breath before you dive in. Balanced speaking time, I'll watch for that as well. And that's just, for people that tend to speak a lot, be mindful of who's not speaking. And for people that tend to do a lot of listening, we want to hear your voices as a part of the group. So it goes all ways, and I'll be watching for that as well and helping to try to call on people if I haven't heard from you. You all are here because of your experience, your expertise, your involvement with this issue in the past, and because of your connection with a larger community of interest. And so, we know that you're bringing that forward. We know that for those of you who are viewing us today, a lot of you are there as constituents, if you will, or as part of the community of people around the table here. And so we know that folks are thinking about that larger liaison. And then we ask that people act in good faith. And you can enjoy my lovely chiming clock in the background, which always makes people smile. At least it makes me smile. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. Thank you for everybody for participating in the doodle poll for the upcoming meetings. We are hoping to be in front of the commission in March. It might be April. It just kind of depends on where we are with our developing recommendations. But you can go ahead and see down the left side here a reminder of all the topics. Here we are at the December 7th meeting, really talking about recommendations. We titled it refinements, but we're not even there yet. We haven't even come up with an initial list. So we're probably a little bit of a meeting behind, and so we can adjust that. just a good reminder of where we've been and what we've heard so far. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So actually, before I dive into the mission and scope of authority, there are a couple of new people here today, and I do want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. And so Drenda Howitt is with the Association of Oregon Counties. We've had a number of folks kind of shift in and out from AOC. We spent some time with Drenda, bringing her up to speed about where the group has been and where we are at. So Drenda, anything you want to share with the group about who you are?
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, I started with Association of Oregon Counties at the end of September. So I am just learning the issues of natural resources, and so I'm here to help however I can and provide the county perspective. I have spent decades in county government, working many years with the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners. And I also spent a number of years working for then Congressman Ron Wyden. So I have federal experience and then local experience. And I'm looking forward to working on behalf of all of Oregon counties on this issue. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Drenda. And then we also have Mary Wall here, chair of the commission, and we did spend some time with Mary as well, because as you know, Commissioner Woolley is no longer, Greg Woolley is no longer on the commission anymore. And Mary is sitting in not as a replacement for Greg, but more as a support for Jill on this one and for Jill and Becky on the other. And so Mary, anything you'd like to say to the group?
Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for the work on this work group. I'm looking forward very much to hearing the results when it comes back to the commission. And I will, as Jamie said, I will just be in the observer role today. I have been staying up to date on it through Greg and through other commissioners. So I've watched your work and I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation today and appreciate what people are doing with this one. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone.
Mary, and welcome. And just to clarify, so Association of Oregon Counties has been a part of the work group. Lauren was our rep, but Lauren was kind of in and out. And then what was the name of the other, the roads person? What's his name, Brenda?
So Jordan Cole sat in for a couple sessions too.
Jordan sat in, and then Lauren went to the Farm Bureau, and then Jordan wasn't here, and so AOC has been absent for a meeting or two, or a couple meetings, and so that's why we sat with Drenda to get her up to speed. So yeah, so that's AOC. Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that's everybody. I'm not going to go through and everyone else introduce themselves. So because we gave Mary and Drenda heads up about all of you, only in the most positive light. So let's go back to the slides if we can. Sam. So again, this meeting is going to be focused on emerging recommendations. What we wanted to put up here, the mission, scope, and authority, that's right from the charter. So here it is. Commission directed the department to review trap check time requirements and come back by January, which now we've moved that to March, February, March, with proposed changes, if any. Scope of authority for the group is identifying and addressing any issues relating to trap check time intervals for fur bear and predatory classifications. We talked about game animals and whether or not we were talking about this at the time. We decided not at this point. The work group may consider relevant information to help the group make recommendations or to address identified issues. So that's direct from your charter. We had conversations about this way back when in June and July when we first got going. And so it's always good to remind ourselves what it is we're here to do. So with that, so we talked about a number of different ways to have this conversation. On the Beaver work group, we've done a couple of small group discussions, but this is a pretty small group. So we thought it's best just to keep everybody together. So what that means though is that, we really need to work on making sure we share the airtime and everybody gets an opportunity to weigh in. But it also means that you do get to ask each other questions. We haven't done a lot of that. And so, as we're kind of sorting out what possible recommendations might be, I mean, this is a good opportunity. We have a good chunk of time today. And so, ask each other the hard questions to try to understand, each other's position and perspective. We're one of the hopes and dreams that we heard from the commissioners when we met with Mary, and she reiterated this for this group, was not only to address this issue and try to resolve this issue because it keeps coming up, in front of the commission, but also to see, can we strike a different tone, a more conciliatory tone, potentially constructive tone for how we resolve issues like this that are really contentious. So that's, that is a hope of theirs. I mean, there are other forums where we can address these issues, as you know, and folks brought that up at the last meeting. It's just like, hey, is this work group really the forum to get us where we need to go, or should we be going directly to the commission or to other places to resolve these issues? And the group was like, this group, y'all said, let's come back together and see what we can do. So we understand that there are other places that you could go to resolve this, but this group has demonstrated a pretty substantial commitment up to this point of trying to understand what the issues are and trying to understand where each other's coming from in order to develop some recommendations that potentially is a different path forward. And so, I say all of that as lots of caveats. Those of you who've worked with me before know, I mean, I'm a very optimistic person. I really believe in the power of the group, but I also am realistic. So, depending on, we'll work, you guys can do the best you can. We'll figure out if there's a there that we can forward on to the commission. I think that through the conversation today, we'll have a good sense at the end of it, kind of where we are. So, we would like to go around and hear everybody's ideas, recognizing that, that there's a lot of information that we've heard up to this point that potentially could inform some different approaches. So we hope that you'll take that all into account. If you've got questions for each other, you need to ask those questions. If there are data gaps or information needs that are really getting in the way of our ability to develop recommendations, identify what those are. We talked about that a little bit at the last meeting about, whether or not we needed additional data around animal suffering, or if we had enough data around animal suffering. We shared around some materials to that effect, but that's still an outstanding question for some folks. And then we want to reserve the last 15 minutes or so just to check in about next steps, next meeting, approaches for drafting the recommendations. I think, what we've heard from people is that people trust in Sam and I to be able to bring forward to the group to reflect back what the group is talking about. But, we're open to ideas if other people want to be involved in that process. So I'm going to stop talking now. And Sam, what is the next slide? Oh, so this is some information that Kevin Blakely thought would be important just to remind us. We sent it out in an email as well. This is the starting point. This is where we are today. And he thought it would, just good to put it out there to remind us, where we are today, and what changes people would be proposing, if any, and why, is really what we're trying to get at. So what Sam's going to do is Sam has a whiteboard, that virtual whiteboard, and Sam, you got that ready to tee up? Do people want us to put this information in that information in the chat about the current trap check, or people have it burned in their brain? We need that in there. Okay. So Sam's got a whiteboard, and in real time, as people are talking, we're going to do our best to populate this whiteboard with emerging ideas and see where we end up. So with that, who would like to go first? And the idea is to hear from everybody. Kelly, I see you've unmuted, so
yeah,
I'm on it.
Great. So you're not asking, though, necessarily for statements or thoughts that maybe we all agree on. Is that right? Just,
well, that is the hope.
Okay, well, that may or may not be what I say.
That may or may not be what you say.
Right.
I think it's basically asking people to do their best to think about, what are some, based on everything we've heard, based on the group's understanding of where everybody's coming from, are there some ideas that are emerging that you think the group could support? And so it's less about reminding everybody what everyone's position is, because I think that's pretty clear. It's more about, is there a path through this? Are there some outstanding questions that people have of each other to help figure out a path through? And if there's not, there's not. But if there is, let's give it a college try and figure out if there is one.
I mean, I think, I'm not sure everyone fully agreed to this in the last meeting, and I was on the phone and someone else, Susan was in my place, but I think for our organization and for others that I heard, there is an impact when you trap wildlife, and we should, I'm hoping as this work group, be striving to minimize the suffering of what is a shared resource, and that's Oregon's wildlife. And I'm wondering if we ever could be at a place where consistency across the board for trap check times could be considered. I mean, Oregon is unique in that when, we looked at all the trap check times across the board, and Oregon has 5. And I still feel as though we didn't get a lot of answers and clear responses about how enforcement works. When you have 48 hours for fur bears, 96 hours to 7 days for predatory animals, depending on where you're trapping them and for the reasons for that. And then 30 days, which is really a joke. I mean, why even trap? 30 days for quick kill or conibear traps. So, I mean, I guess I wanted to talk about consistency and going back to why is Oregon. So that's one of the thoughts. Because the trap check times range. But lastly, I think I'm not sure again if we all agreed that trapping inherently causes suffering. And I would love to revisit that conversation. And I feel like ODFW in the meeting did not acknowledge that. And I'm asking, I'd love to hear from ODFW. That isn't a judgment on it, just can we agree that wildlife suffer in a trap, and it's it might, that we might not all be in the same place, but is it exacerbated by the length of time? And we would say, yes, it is. And that's why we'd like to see stricter trap check times.
So Kelly, first, thanks for being the first one out of the gate.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Second, let me just unpack 2 of the pieces. I think we got the consistency one there really well.
Yeah.
The other 2 are, the first statement you said was, can we recognize there is an impact to wildlife when they're trapped?
Mm-hmm.
That was the first statement. The second statement is that we want to reduce animal suffering, and do we agree to that? Can we agree to that? So Sam, can you put both of those on the board as well? Because I think that those, when you start to think about a framework for recommendations, I mean, and we struggled with this a little bit at the last meeting, and Bob, put his finger on it. It's like, what are we doing talking about value statements like 5, 6 meetings, 7 meetings in? We should have been doing this early on. And I think, and so if there are value statements that the group can support, let's not lose sight of those. And so I want to put those on there as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So who'd like to go next? Kevin?
Yeah, and I wasn't very quick with my unmute button, and I appreciate having that chart up there, the previous chart, and you don't have to flip to it. I think we've all seen it, but when we talk about the different check intervals, and Kelly's bringing up, a good question, that there's still a lot of confusion in the complexity that Oregon has. The one thing that I did want to just clarify or draw out, that when we look at the different check intervals, we're really down to a very small subset of species that have the predatory animal check intervals. So that the fur bearers are 48, unprotected mammals are 48. And so pretty much any of your animals on public land are going to be 48. That's one way to parse that down. And the animals that are predatory that are left that would have different regulations would be coyotes, rabbits, and rodents, and of course by statute birds and feral swine. So pulling those out, you're really talking about rodents and coyotes. And from a damage standpoint, from your rodents, you have your boomers, your mountain beavers, and nutria or beaver that fit that category. And then you may have, occasionally some other species like maybe yellow belly marmot that's, in Central Oregon, something like digging burrows and causing some damage, but really a small subset. So I know there still is an interest and a concern about any animal that's in a trap.
Yes.
And so I'm not excluding that as a concept, but from the picture of species, the majority of the species that could be trapped are going to fit the 488-hour category. And so even though it says predatory animal, I really think it's a very few animals on the list that we're talking about, which might be part of a discussion later as we talk about that. So I really liked having that chart up there, but as Kelly put it out, it still seems very nebulous to people when they just look at it if they're not very familiar with it.
So Sam, can you put the chart in the chat so it's available to everybody? And apologies to our viewers. Go ahead.
Sorry, it doesn't like the chart format, so I can type it out, but it'll take me a minute. Sorry. That
makes sense. So, and sorry, for our viewing folks, we really will use the chat sparingly because we know you can't see it. But this is the same chart that's in the PowerPoint that's on the website, so you can look at it there. It's the chart of the current trap check times. So Jill, I see your hand, but Kevin, I have a question for you. So when you talk about species, you say the majority of animals fit the 48-hour. And so can you say again the animals that don't, that fall within the 72 and 30-day?
So by legal definitions, ORS 610, predatory animals are defined as first, private property, coyotes, rabbits, and what that was meant to mean was essentially your hares, because then it says then rodents, your rabbits, rodents, feral swine, birds causing damage, and that's a very small subset of birds like pigeons or starlings. And so those are the ones that are defined by predatory animals statute. So from a trap regulation, you're talking about coyotes and then those rodents, mountain beaver, nutria being invasive species.
And beaver on private land.
Right.
Which is significant too.
Yep.
And coyotes.
Thank you for that clarification. Jill?
Yeah, I was just wondering, do fox, skunks, raccoon fall into those categories when they're causing damage?
No, and Brian's shaking his head no. They're going to be either a fur bearer or an unprotected mammal, which is going to fit a 48-hour regulation. And ODFW can nod their head to that, but yep.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have anything else, Jill? Because your hand is still up. Nope, okay. All right, who wants to go next? Kelly's given us some things to think about. Kevin's made a clarification. I've left my my sound on, and you can hear the ticking of my clock in the background. It's kind of like that Jeopardy, it's waiting for someone to dive in. So I know you guys have ideas because we had a very spirited conversation at the last meeting about about what we're trying to do here and what some suggestions might be. I mean, we've talked about we've talked about 24-hour, we've talked about 48-hour, we've talked about keeping it the same, we've talked about daily, and what that difference is and what that does. So are there ideas that people want to put out? Kyle, thank you.
Yeah, it's really a lifeline, Jamie. one of the things I thought we'd walked away from last time was maybe we could just walk through to be productive with our time here. Like, let's set 30 on the table and talk about, like Kelly mentioned, right? She's got a feeling about 30, and Kevin's got a feeling about 30, and let's mull these trap check intervals that way so that we can see where and if there is wiggle room amongst these parties. Does that make sense?
I have
I gotta
24
interject
hours.
here.
I'm 24 hours.
Oh, actually, hold on. We've got
interject
two
here.
people speaking all at once. Hold on. So Tyler, you go ahead, and then Kelly, you go ahead.
I was
Tyler?
just going to say, Kyle, can you confirm the interval that we have on the sheet of paper here? I think you were
That's
talking about 30
30
day.
Yeah, I just said 30 for 30 days. Yeah.
It's 30 days, Sam.
Yeah, good catch there.
That'd be a whole new time category. Kelly, I'm sorry, what were you?
No, Kyle, I was thinking you thought I meant 30 hours. I just was.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, 30 days.
Yeah. I was reading what Sam was writing, and I was like,
Okay.
oh, I'm sure that must be something different. No, I meant 30-day interval. Yeah. And I assume that's what you meant, Kelly, was in your earlier reference.
Yes, 30 days.
Okay, so let's talk about the 30-day. What are the barriers and challenges to changing it? That I know that people have asked about those before, really trying to understand, why does a 30-day exist? And if there are some ways that we can problem solve to address those barriers and challenges, then let's talk about that if we're going to propose something different. And so, I think we've heard a lot about why people would like it to be less than 30 days. I mean, in line with other states, reduces animal suffering, inconsistent application of kill traps, potentially non-target animals. There's just a number of things we talked about that were concerns about a 30-day. And then some of the things we talked about that were challenges and barriers had to do with resources in terms of being able to check traps more frequently, terrain, geography, weather. So those were some of the issues we talked about on the other side, on both, on the two sides. Tyler?
Yeah, I was just going to confirm. So I think what Kyle's saying too is we just go by interval and then insert some explanation for why those intervals are what they are in given situations. I think that would be very helpful. And to my knowledge, I don't know that we've done that in this work group, but just to see it on paper so it's all fresh in everyone's mind, and then give folks that are immersed in these intervals, like trappers, the ability to speak to that and what the hindrances would be for a reduced interval.
So, and I think that that's a helpful thing, Tyler. What I'm worried about a little bit is I don't want to spend this meeting having everyone defending, sort of what is current practice, because I think we've talked about that a lot. And so, if there are, I think it's more around, if there are issues, if there are challenges to having that time changed that need to be problem solved, kind of what is that? So for example, Tyler, Kevin had talked about that, assuming that a trapper is using best management practices, BMP approved or compliant traps, educated, trained, working within their area, all of that, assuming all of that, in the best possible scenario, the animal is killed efficiently, quickly. There is limited, if any, suffering, and that trap may not be checked for 30 days for a predator side. And so I think what we're trying to do is like, okay, well, what if all of those things don't line up? What happens then? I mean, how are we problem solving that to reduce animal suffering if that's what people want to do? So that's, and this is, I'm just trying to close the gap here. I don't want to have us spend a lot of time just like retreating. It's more, where is that space that we need to be problem solving and doing something different? If there's questions people have to try to understand more, I'm all for that too. Does that make sense, Tyler?
Well, I know Kevin spoke to some of these intervals in a previous presentation, but I do think it would be helpful for all of us to understand why the intervals are set, why they are. And obviously these intervals were agreed upon in the past. So I think that it's a relevant conversation. And if there are disagreements about why we are currently operating the way we are, then I think that's a launching pad in itself. But, you know, my expectation for this meeting was that, and maybe I'm incorrect in how our last meeting ended, but we were going to go through each of these intervals and discuss whether each group was willing to move on said interval.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's what Kyle has put on the table. And so I think we're saying a lot of the same thing, but I am challenging all of you to not only put out the reasons, you know, sort of why, sort of to defend why it should stay. I want you to really think about, you know, how do we problem solve around the issues that people have brought forward around potential problems with the current, you know, with the current trap check, because that's really why we're here, you know, with those current times. But I do, Tyler, I mean, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I do understand that it is important for people to understand sort of why they exist, you know, why people settled on 30 to begin with. So let's go ahead and let's mute. Let's go pause. Let's go ahead and see the people's hands that are up and then see where this conversation goes. Bob?
Thanks, Jamie. You know, I sat on some of those prior trap check work groups. I didn't hear a compelling reason then. I haven't heard it in this process either as to why we can't standardize the trap check times. Understanding that it may take more labor, more cost. I agree with Kelly's assertion that animals do suffer in traps, and the longer they're in there, the more they suffer, the more harm that's done to them. The less likely you are to be able to save a non-target species that is trapped. So I think there's compelling reasons to try to bring it down. I think when we put lethal devices on the landscape that are indiscriminate, there is a responsibility to check them frequently. So I would start at the other extreme. I think we should standardize it, and I think we should consider standardizing it at 24 hours.
So I'm going to work with you for just a moment then. So, you know, you've been with this conversation for a long time. You have heard the concerns about resources and capacity and geography and weather and, you know, I mean, all of these concerns that have been raised on the trapper side of things. What suggestions would you have about how to address any of those to move to a standardized trap check?
Weather, I think, is not a strong argument in the sense that, you know, if there's a act of God, if there's a snowstorm and you can't get to your traps, there is prosecutorial discretion, judicial discretion in terms of, you know, violations. So I don't really see that as a credible argument. Particularly, you can make that argument really at any time. You could have the snowstorm at day 29 rather than day 2. So you're always, you know, subject to weather. And I think there are legitimate legal mechanisms to get around that. In terms of geography, I think, again, I don't think there's much of an argument in terms of you should set traps in an area in which you can check them on a reasonable basis. The idea that you're spreading them over a huge geography, to me, suggests that you're over your capacity for doing it responsibly. And so you should figure out a geography that makes sense to set traps within and stick with that, as opposed to trying to set them over a huge range. And then in terms of cost, you know, I think it's the cost of doing business in a humane and responsible way for those folks that are doing it as a business and profiting from it. They're going to have to increase their costs and their pricing. For those that are doing it as a hobby, there's less of it. The financial impact is different. If you're doing it for recreation, then I think it's reasonable to ask people to do it at a smaller scale or a more reasonable pace in order to do it in a humane way. doesn't eliminate the ability to do it either recreationally or commercially. But in the case of folks who are doing commercially, if they can't do it at their current costs or their current price scale, they need to increase that price scale to make it economically viable.
Thanks for that. Thanks for weighing in.
Sure.
And providing more information. Kevin, I'm going to go ahead with you. And Jim, I did see your hand up. I want to let you know that. So we've got Kevin, Kyle, and then Jim.
Thank you. I'll put the hand down here in a moment. I was just, as the question first came up with the 30-day, I just wanted to provide kind of the same clarification that I did previously, and that's to specify when we talk about 30-day checks, we're talking about traps that are lethal sets designed to be, remove animals lethally. And again, it's limited to those predator species, the coyotes, the rodents on private land. So I just want everyone, as they're thinking about that, to keep that in mind in perspective. And I do want to just iterate, now from trying not to be a defensive standpoint, but I do want to clarify from what Bob said in that indiscriminate traps that are designed to be a generalist, right? Traps that can capture a variety of animals can be deployed in a way that is very selective in which they remove. And as I spoke to earlier, 98% targets specific for wildlife services, only a 2% non-target capture rate shows that we can deploy very indiscriminate tools that can capture a variety of animals in ways to be very selective in how they're trapped. So I just want to keep that in perspective as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Kyle?
Yep. Thanks, Jamie. And I think I was going to kind of go the same place Kevin is. I definitely appreciate Bob. Right. We're here to share our perspectives. And so I appreciate you doing that. And I guess for mine, specific to the 30-day check, it's kind of the point Kevin was making. When we're trapping mountain beavers, the term indiscriminate, I don't think fairly applies to the way you're doing that, right? You're climbing sometimes 2 hours down off a landing into the bottom of a unit, and you're trapping a beaver or a mountain beaver run system. I mean, you are up to your shoulders in those runs with a conibear that's this big, and there's really a very specific critter that you can catch when you're doing it that way. And it's the target species, and they are a kill set. And I think as in terms of that, if we want to start saying that it's gee shucks, they ought to just deal with the financial ramifications of having to pay more to check it every day. The thing you gain is that 2% of bycatch that Kevin mentioned, and it may be less than that. Maybe ODFW has some numbers for bycatch in terms of the boomer trapping effort, but it's probably quite a bit less than that. And I'm not sure that's a balance trade. And so we can talk about 30 days, maybe something less than that. Kevin's got some reasons why less than that would cause a problem, but 24 hours for a boomer trapping exercise is flat unworkable. And you asked me if I would agree, I would say no.
And Kyle, so if we can just stick with you just for a moment, and then Jim is next after you, so maybe Jim can elaborate too. So you're talking about for mountain beaver, and you're talking about for damage control, and you're talking about that, because of that geography and because of the trap set type, that there is a 98% certainty that you're going to get the animal that you are trapping for.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? And I don't know what the certainty is that it will be killed, immediately. I don't know where that data is. Maybe Jim,
I think they're fairly efficient. I would have to ask someone smarter than me. I spent 2 winters doing it and never seemed to have an issue with efficiency for mountain beavers.
Okay, I just wanted to.
And to the point of in order to facilitate a shorter check time, putting them in places you can check easier. I don't know how to manipulate the landscape such that it's right. The critters are where they are, and they're on the landscape where they are, and we don't want more roads necessarily for other reasons. So they still take that time.
So that's that road density issue that Derek brought forward, you know, that Kevin and Derek brought forward in terms of looking at different states around that road density and ability.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't want a section grid system like they've got in South Dakota. You could run a heck of a trap line in 24 hours, but we don't want that here. Trust me, folks. This should all be in balance. That's all my point is.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Jim, you're next, and then Kelly.
Well, first of all, I want to comment on Bob's idea of a 24-hour trap check. That's a non-starter for us. We just simply can't do it. Here in Eastern Oregon, you know, our areas here don't have you know, the animals per square mile that some areas do. And so a lot of people are running 100-mile trap line. And when you get, I mean, and this isn't on paved roads. And when you're done with that trap line, you have animals to take care of. You've caught this animal, you killed this animal, you need to take care of it, make use of the resource. And there's as much time spent there as there is in setting your traps and being out there checking. And I'll also comment, you know, on the 30-day check here. I use a lot of killer traps, the conibear traps, in my muskrat trapping. Now I'm on a 48-hour check there, but I'll guarantee you that every animal that you get in a conibear trap is going to be dead. I can't, you know, it's been a year or two, I don't think, since I've had anything that was in a conibear trap that wasn't dead. I mean, they're in a fishing trap, you know, and anybody with the knowledge knows where to put that trap, you know, so that non-targets aren't going to be getting in it. So that the 30-day trap check doesn't bother me because I know those animals are going to be dead. So that's my opinion.
So Jim, I'm going to sit with you for just a moment. So so the conibear, so you're saying that there's a high level of efficiency and certainty on the conibear trapping. It just in part because of, you know, is it because there's a less likelihood of bycatch with a conibear setting? What are the animals that are likely to be bycatch in a conibear set?
Likely to be what now?
What animals would be a bycatch? Would be a non-target animal that might get caught in a conibear set?
For muskrats? You know,
I don't know. I mean,
that's mainly what I'm using for. I mean, you know, if you go setting them, you know, that's out of the habitat of the animal that you're after, you know, there's no telling it. Probably anything could get into it, but you've got to know what you're doing. You have to know where you're setting. You have to know the habits of the animal, what they'll do, what they won't do. You know, so the trapper has to be knowledgeable about where he's doing and what he's after.
and what would happen if So two other questions I have for you, Jim. So one is, you talked about 100-mile trap sets, and that makes it really challenging to check within a 24-hour period. What would happen if the trap sets were shorter lengths? What does that mean to the trapper? Or the
24 hours?
No, shorter in length. So if it's like a 50-mile or a 25-mile, I mean, what does that do, economics or others?
You're not going to catch near the animals, and your costs are going to be doubled. So, that 24-hour trap check is, in my estimation, is just trying to do away with trapping.
And that's so you're primarily a fur bearer trapper.
Yes, I'm a fur bearer.
And you've talked before about how, you already try to check your traps on a daily basis because of the, quality.
Not daily, every other day.
Sorry?
48 hours.
Yeah. So, and that you talked about that you comply with that, in part because of the quality of the fur, that's one of the reasons why you comply with that. But do you do any predator side trapping, damage control? Because I thought you talked about that for coyote.
I'll go out if I've got some landowners that I normally trap on who are having problems, and they call me and need some help. I will do it. But that's close to home. If I have to make sure I have the time to do it. But yeah, but I don't do that very often.
Okay, so maybe that's more still a question for Kevin. So I'm trying to understand that, what are the challenges to having it be less, because we're talking about 30 days. We'll talk about 48 and 72 here in a moment, but just sticking with the 30 days. I guess I'm just wondering, Jim, in your perspective, it doesn't sound like that's really something that you're not working within the 30-day trap check interval time frame.
No.
Right, that's what I didn't think so. Okay, all right, well, we'll take up with you when we talk about the 48-hour. So Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually, when I raised my hand, I wasn't thinking we're sticking to 30 days, but I will respect that and just say that it would be hard for me to believe that any animal would be alive after 30 days when the trapper comes back to check the trap. And Jim, I believe fully you are like a responsible trapper. And some of what you said reminds me, though, where you had said something about you have to know what you're doing, be knowledgeable of this. Sometimes this is when I believe policy should also help shape behavior for those that aren't as responsible or knowledgeable, so that there is accountability and enforcement. And so I think that's why the 30-day seems so exceptionally cruel, long, outside of the norm of other states. Surely Oregon can do better and get closer to something that seems reasonable, because I know dogs have been caught in conibear traps. Depending on if they're submerged in the water or if they're set in the water, but they're not embedded underneath. If an animal walks in a different way, they're not always quick kill. And I would just say again, how would we know if we're not checking the trap, but every 30 days, exactly how that animal ultimately died? So that's why I guess why I'm on the 30 days.
Thanks. Let's stick with 30 days here until, for like another 10 minutes or so, because I'm not hearing much in terms of, I'm hearing 24 hours across the board, consistency across the categories. There are some economic and geography and resource challenging issues around 30 days. It's a small subset of animals in 30 days. There's a high certainty of that the animals are killed, because that's the primary purpose of that category. So that's all the things that I'm hearing. I'm not hearing much around the what happens if, for bycatch or non-target catch, and the ability to, get that animal out. I haven't heard much about that. And I haven't heard any other sort of options on the table about, ways to address some of those resource capacity questions around if the 30 days were reduced. So, Stan, Stan, you must be just calling in a different way. So, Kyle?
Yeah, thinking about Kelly's concern for the critter, obviously if a critter's stuck for 30 days, but that's not, I guess my point, at least my understanding, and in practice, we don't have critters that aren't intended to be killed stuck in the trap for 30 days. And I think that's where Kevin was trying to talk about the narrow band of animals that we're going after. With that 30-day limitations, we can be very specific about the sets and the way we're doing that. And to other Kelly's point about policy driving behavior to some extent, I think Jamie, you had a quote earlier about we assume that folks are utilizing the correct BMPs and trap and tension bands and the different things that Jim and Stan are experts on. If we're at a point where that's not occurring, but and to that extent it's a problem, then we have an enforcement issue, not necessarily a policy issue. If we don't have it as an expectation that those traps are adherent to BMPs so that you can do things that Jim does by being a responsible trapper, then maybe that's the discussion we need to be adding into the mix here, right? In terms of stiffening the BMP. Now I know those guys already have training courses that they've got to go through to get their trapping license. They've got to have years of experience in order to be successful, right? That's the point Jim's making, is you don't accidentally hook a critter by setting a conibear out on a parking lot, right? I mean, so I think there may be some BMP if there's a gap in the expectations of the trap that you're using. Let's firm that up. Is the last point I'm making. Shut up.
And Jim, Tyler, and then Jim.
Yeah, I could just second what Kyle said. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. I think our BMPs are there for a reason. And I do want to say, though, we keep asking the question, how do we know in some way or another? And there surely have to be data out there pertaining to the efficiency of these traps. If not, that's a data gap. And we're kind of moving on the agenda here, but that's something that we could flesh out via study, but this group hasn't been real receptive to acquiring more data.
Kevin? I'm sorry, it was Jim next and then Kevin. Jim?
I just wanted to make the point, on this 30-day trap check, there's no fur bearer trappers that are going out and doing this. This is done by the Wildlife Services, and these people are professional trappers. They know what they're doing. Kevin can tell you, he probably hires some of the best trappers in the state to do that because they know what they do. They can do it on their own, and they're not going to make sets. They're going to kill animals indiscriminately.
I would say the best ones are the retired ones after 40 years of experience. But no, Jim, just to echo what Jim was saying or trying to say, and speaking to knowing whether an animal is dead quickly in a trap or not, you know that by the signs at the scene. If an animal doesn't die quickly, it struggles. And when you're using a neck snare, it's set in a way to be very effective and efficient at being lethal or a conibear, you tell very quickly by this, the lack of a struggle, where that animal succumbed quickly, and it was humane. And so that's something we're looking at. We don't want using a lightweight cable, that cable to break or to get twisted up and so forth, for an animal to work at it for a while, or for a large animal and a conibear. And so if you're a fur trapper, you don't want to lose fur. And if you're a damage trapper, you don't want that animal getting away and still being on the list of causing damage. And so when you have any signs of a struggle, you're like, hey, I got to fine tune things quickly. Otherwise, you're not going to be in a job if you can't do what you're aiming to do. And so that's.
Can I pause you there, Kevin? So who would make sure that, who would say that you didn't have a job? I mean, what's the enforcement side of that? I mean, so let's just play that out. It's my job to be devil's advocate here.
Okay.
So you got your 30-day trap check, you check your trap, the animal is, has been dead, obviously, but there are signs of struggle. It's hard to tell if it was because of, other animals eating it and pulling, who knows what it is. But I mean, how is that? How do you enforce yourself to make sure that that doesn't happen over and over and over again?
Right. No, as a fur trapper, and I'll let Jim or others speak to the fur side, but if you're trapping for fur and you don't catch fur, or you catch an animal that gets away, you're quickly defeating your purpose if you don't improve your skill set, right? Otherwise, your effort to be out there on the landscape is a waste. So you have to improve your skill set. Otherwise, you won't be efficient at what you're doing. And what I meant when I said you'll be out of a job, if you're trying to stop damage and you can't stop damage, sooner or later, your supervisor is going to have to talk to that employee that can't stop the damage, because they're going to be hearing from those producers, I have loss every night, and this individual is not stopping the loss. This is a problem. The desire of a trapper is to improve efficiency and effectiveness. And so every time we have an animal that is captured, we're learning from that event. And we want to improve our skill set. We want to make ourselves efficient and effective at doing our job, whether that's a fur trapping job or whether that's a damage job, for efficiency's sake. And so you're looking at that scene. Where did the animal come from? How did it approach the trap? How was it captured in the trap? Do I need to position the trap slightly different so I get a different catch? There's so much that you do to improve that skill set. And that's why I kind of jokingly said the best trappers are the retired ones of 40 years experience, because you got 40 years of fine tuning that skill set. So just to answer the point of when we talk about these traps being lethal, my point of speaking was just to say, based upon what we learn at the site, if it's not lethal, we got to fine tune that very quickly, because that's the aim of what we're trying to do. That's what being a professional is. Trying to perfect it as best as you can, with the natural environment, with things that you can't control. You're trying to fine tune that skill set to make it such. Was there a follow-up question?
No, I'm just thinking about the accountability part of that. And so it sounds like part of the accountability part is on the part of the client, that it's like, well, you mean you're doing a bad job, so I'm going to tell you. Part of the accountability is within the unit, or the department or the agency, in terms of, that people are spending too much time, or it's not being effective, or they're not being efficient. I would hope that animal suffering enters into that equation, because we've talked about that quite a bit. But yet you didn't mention that. So I'm just curious about that. And then the other part of the accountability question is the enforcement side, in terms of that, other sort of, I don't know, bystanders, or I don't know what the right word is, other external enforcement to make sure that trapping practices are being adhered to, or to follow up on complaints. So those seem to be the accountability measures that are built in. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably rabbit trail in a whole separate conversation. If you wanted to talk specific to wildlife services, there's a lot of accountability requirements and things that have to be in place in order to be able to try to have that public trust. So there's a host of things there, and I don't know if you really want to take the time of this group right now to get in that, but I mean, everything that we do within our consultation process and within our NEPA process cooperative relationships, supervisors going out and evaluating their field employees and reviewing what they're doing in the field, taking some of that seasoned experience and, and helping to get some cross training from other trappers. All those things are built into that model to try to promote efficiency, effectiveness, and following all the standards, putting a lot of protocols in place to make it a professional organization providing professional service.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin. And, and I don't want to go down the rabbit trail, obviously, either, but I think, I'm trying to unpack the accountability side of this. So if, for example, I'm totally devil's advocate here. If we're saying we're going to stick with 30 days and, these are the reasons why, if the public perception is such that 30 days is abhorrent, then, sort of what is the accompanying information for the public about why the 30-day is necessary and how, bad eggs are being held accountable and how animals are not, non-target animals are not suffering. Just all of those pieces that we've been talking about here. And so that's what I'm trying to understand is sort of how that, how that other side of it sort of, that's part of the issue that we need to figure out how to address here, because I don't know, because there is a perception that, that it's not working or that it's, or that it's inhumane, or that there are all these problems. And so if there's something that we need to do to problem solve around that, that's why I was going towards the accountability, questions.
The world that we live in today with much digital technology, everyone's got a phone with a camera, hundreds of thousands of trail cameras on the landscape. I can't even begin to say how many people out on the landscape. There's so many ways for people to have experiences with wildlife. And that's why as, professional or even a fur trapper, you need to minimize, your exposure to others, and you need to be efficient and effective. You don't want an animal to pull a trap out of the ground and run off with the trap. Right? You don't want it to break a snare and be wearing a necklace somewhere. That is not good for the animal. And that's certainly not the public perception. So, there's so much in that public trust just because there's so much public out there in with camera and in the environment. So I'd say there's a huge accountability out there in the public environment.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I appreciate you sticking with me there. Jill, your hand is up next, and then Quinn, and then Kelly.
Yeah, okay, so we've heard a lot about the trappers know where to trap. They know the specific habitat. They know the specific needs of the animals. They know how to set the traps, so it's highly efficient and can kill 90%, 99% of the target animals and very few non-target. And the fur and the meat is not important. So, it's fine to let it kill, it gets killed and it shrivels up or it dries up or it rots or it gets eaten. None of that matters if it's been killed in the trap. So why do we need 30 days? That's the question. And you kind of touched on that, Jamie. Why? What about 20 days? What about 10 days? What about 7 days? What about 5 days? I can think of a lot of animals that would be using the same habitat as a muskrat, or there's birds that we set traps in our barn for mice, and we wind up with a bird. Why would a bird go into our barn? Because the doors were almost shut. They were just a little crack. So there's a lot of marsh birds. There's things like that are in the habitat. So they would probably get killed too. Not that that would make any difference in whether it's 30 days or not. So, but it still comes down to why 30 days? I haven't really heard any good reasons, because it sounds like everybody's very professional about this and gets their animals and, would not be leaving it for 30 days anyway. So I guess I'd like to explore that. Why 30 days? And why not 10? Why not 5? Why not 7? for a kill trap. And that's all I'm referring to.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Kelly, and then, Quinn, and then Kelly.
Yeah, I have just a couple of thoughts just in response to things that have been brought up. One, and I've learned so much through this process, and I'm still learning. But when conibear traps were brought up, I did a quick Google search, and the first thing that came up, there's 3 videos, right? And the first 2 are how to safely set a conibear trap. The third video is how to release a dog from a trap. And so, for me, and I suspect for a member of the public, that's not terribly reassuring, right? And I think speaks to a lot of the concerns. And one thing we haven't talked about a lot in this group, and that the commission is going to have to deal with when that comes to rulemaking, is the public's tolerance for this, right? This is going to come before the commission, and it's going to be part of a public process, no matter what this group recommends. So, I just want to throw that out there that, despite assurances that we're hearing today about the efficacy of these killing traps, not finding really reassuring information there just from a really basic cursory, internet search. The other thing, and if I'm understanding this correctly, is that we're talking, we've kind of been talking about these longer intervals, the 7 to 30-day interval. And again, what I'm hearing is, well, this is mostly applying to trapping done by wildlife services. And what's interesting to me about that, and for the record, I too strongly support, a standardized 24-hour daily trap check time, like many states have moved to. But what's interesting about that model, right, is that an individual trapper like Jim is subject to the most currently onerous time, or trap check time interval in Oregon. And a highly resourced agency has the most permissive trap check time interval. So it seems to me that a highly resourced agency that's accountable to the public should be held to at least the same standard as an individual trapper who's out there doing it, these things and taking responsibility of their own accord and has a statutory requirement. So I hadn't thought about it before until we really started making this dividing line of, oh, these predatory animals are really, that's wildlife services. Just interesting to me that a big agency with more resources than an individual like Jim has a much more permissive framework to work within.
Thanks for that, Quinn. So, Kevin, any thoughts on what Quinn just shared? I think that's we're still talking about 30-day. We're at 10 after 3. We're going till 4:30. It'd be nice to talk about the other categories as well. You see where we land on that. So I am curious too, sort of what the groups, where the group is going in terms of different options around the 30-day and problem solving around that. You heard from Jill, it's just like, well, why not 5? And why not 10? What's the, what are we trying to do here? What are we sort of, what are we, what is the 30-day trap check? How do we benefit from that? And what are the challenges to doing something different? And how do we solve those challenges to get to something different? I think that's what we're trying to say. And I know that, there are folks in the room here who are concerned that, any kind of change is a bit of a slippery slope. But I think, what you keep hearing over and over in this group is there's a role for trapping in Oregon, and we're trying to do it as humanely as possible, with best management practices, best trap technology, education, training, good enforcement, all of that. And so I'm not hearing people saying, we're going to try to regulate it out, so that it's not possible. But if there are these challenges, we need to figure out how to address those. So have I filled enough airtime, Kevin, for you to think about a way to respond?
Well, was that your strategy? It was stalling for me?
That was my strategy. It was not to put you in the spot right away, to give you some time to think. So go ahead.
No, I think some good points in those statements and good questions come from that. And again, just tying an example of the questions that were asked earlier of Jim and looking at his trap line and the length of his trap line. You know, a fur trapper going out is choosing to go out, and they typically do their own scouting, figure out where they're going to be to optimize their catch rate. And they're targeting specific animals, meaning a specific type of animal. And once they've gone out and done their homework, kind of the areas where they think it's likely, that, again, they're trying to maximize the best locations where their sets are going to produce for their interest. And I think that's, you know, along the same line of people having a fishing hole and they kind of do their homework over time, or whether that's hunting, or the same individuals that go out to do bird watching. You know, they have their sweet spots where they like to go because they've got some history and they got some awareness of productivity for what they're going for. When you look from a damage perspective and from a wildlife services point, and again, wildlife services is probably a big portion of the work that's done under the damage statutes, but I certainly don't want to even begin to assume that that's the only. So I do want to make sure that everyone does remember that there's other private entities. So, but from wildlife services standpoint, now we're talking about, you pick a Harney County, a Malheur County, and we're responding to phone calls from individuals that have damage occurring at all different parts of the county. And so now you're an entirely different perspective. I'm going from choosing to go out and choosing to set up traps to capture animals that I'm targeting for and setting those up for my efficiency of my choice, versus there's individuals with real problems and real conflicts that I'm trying to respond to right now. And those conflicts come to me. I don't select where the conflicts are going to be. And so we're responding to conflicts in a large geographic area simultaneously. And so I think that's immediately why, if you look at the history of this discussion, why they determined that for damage purposes, those damage statutes were given a different check interval, is because you're in an entirely different realm of choice and action. And because those can be occurring over such a large area at the same time in a large geographic area, that really compounds an individual's abilities to be able to address things in multi-fashion. So, you know, I think that's one aspect of why that's in place and kind of why that is different. And so, yeah, you do have an agency highly accountable to the public, and certainly a case and more collective resources than an individual that's going out for their individual purpose. But you're talking about an agency with individuals that are their tasked and assigned to respond to, you know, countywide problems, and how many people throughout those counties need some level of assistance. And that assistance ranges from trapping a coyote, killing a lamb, to someone that just saw a coyote because now it's fall and they're driving during the time when coyotes are going to be seen and there's no more vegetation on the bushes. And we're just simply concerned, and we're just providing a technical assistance, or giving someone a recommendation of just, hey, you need to get rid of your cat food so the raccoon stops coming and eating the food. And we cover all those scenarios in a given day. And that has to be incorporated into all the activities that are going on. So I think it's an entirely different concept, which is why the groups in the past have recognized it being a different scenario.
So Kevin, and I can appreciate, thank you for sharing that additional information. And if I can, so my takeaway from what you just said is that, you know, in geographies in Oregon, where, you know, it's very large, very diverse, folks are very far away and far apart from each other, that you're responsible to respond to a wide range of damage issues. And that if you had a shorter trap check time, if it was shorter than 30 days, you know, shorter trap check time, that would undermine your ability to be responsive to other, you know, calls that were coming in. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure I understood that. And so Kevin, so before we hear from you, Tyler, Kevin, I am interested to know, I mean, Jill put out 5-day, 10-day, you know, 2-week, other intervals. What would need to happen within your agency to have a shorter trap check time than 30 days on the predator side?
Well, again, to keep it on the 30-day when we're talking about killing traps, I thought Jill made some very, you know, important aspects and saying that understand that the animal caused damage, that the trap is very selective, very few non-targets, low risk in those categories. Yes, it doesn't remove all risk, but this group's already, acknowledged that we can't remove all risks, and we're not aiming to remove all risk. We want to get those to as small as possible. And I think these measures have. And so she asked the question, if it's 30 days, okay, and it's going to decompose, in a snare, or why not remove it sooner than that? And I would say from an efficiency standpoint, why would you remove it sooner than 30 days? Now, first of all, most of our equipment is checked much sooner than the maximum date. We're talking again about maximum check intervals. A 30-day is the maximum check interval. It does not mean we check it on day 29. Most often the equipment is checked much more frequently, because if we're on that property, if we've got damage occurring, there's a lot of fine tuning that has to go on to be able to address damage. And so I would say equipment is generally checked more often than not. But if we're confident and we have good information and stats that show that our non-target is so low, and we're using methods in a very selective way so that the animal is quickly killed and not restrained for prolonged periods, the 30 days, what's the difference of letting it decompose at 20 days versus 30 days? If it promotes the efficiency, if the animal has been humanely dispatched in that trapping device, what's the difference of letting it decompose over another 10 days or 15 days? Other than just the sound of 30 days just sounds horrifying. But again, we're talking about an animal that is dead in a various stage of decomposition. So, and that's just kind of a blunt and raw picture of it. But I think Jill kind of pointed those things out. And so I think asking the question conversely is, why would it matter if the animal has been humanely dispatched in that trapping equipment?
Yeah, and I think, and Tyler and Kelly, thank you for your patience. You guys can tell I'm working y'all pretty hard in this meeting to try to see where we can.
Can you turn down one of the lights? It's pretty bright, all those spotlights.
Yeah, we got it right on. You've got a very white background, Kevin. So I want to flip it on its ear and have you think about this, and then I'm going to go to Tyler. And so, considering. So the two things that come to mind. One, I'm just curious about, it's curious to me that you would want a trap tied up for 30 days, because it seems like, trap or BMP compliant traps, you want to be able to use them. So I'm just curious about that. But you don't have to answer that.
To answer that question, a snare is a piece of cable. It's the very low cost, low maintenance. And so a lot of snares don't get reused, because if they get kinked and work, they're hard to put back to use. So they're almost a disposable item. So conibears, much more costly, and you don't want to, and generally don't leave them out for that long, because you have fewer of them, and it's much better to put that to use where you need to.
Yeah, and so thank you for that. So just think, and so here's something to think about, going kind of riffing off of what Jill was talking about. It's just like, what if you were to flip it and say, okay, we recognize we're using BMP compliant traps. We've got high standards of training. We're accountable to the public. We've got a large geographic area that we're trying to serve. We're mostly checking traps in a shorter period of time, fill in the blank, whatever that is. What if you flipped it on its ear and said, that the majority of the time we're going to check it in a shorter, in 5 days, 10 daes, whatever it is. And that if it's longer than that, there's a hardship, reason. And so it's more of rather than setting the standard for the lowest, number of incidences, you're setting the standard for the majority, and that you have some way to address those unique sets of circumstances, that there's like a lot of, a big boom of coyotes, and, they're just everywhere all at the same time in a very remote part of the state, or weather or whatever. So I guess I'm just asking you to think about that. And then we'll hear from the people whose hands are up, and then I'd be curious to have you circle back. And I wish I could turn your background light down so you didn't look like you were in a spotlight, but there we are. Thanks for letting me pick on you. All right, Tyler, you've been patient.
Thanks. Yeah, and Kevin touched on this, but I'll say it more bluntly. Regarding killing traps, what really is the difference between 7 and 30 days? I mean, if that animal is killed in seconds, what does that extra 3 weeks mean? I understand that the 30-day interval has a PR problem, as Kevin mentioned, but looking at it from an animal welfare perspective, to me, there's no difference there. It makes wildlife services more efficient in the work they can do. So I don't know who wants to respond to that, but to me, 7 days and 30 days from an animal well perspective it's the same.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Tyler, and if I can, and maybe Kelly will say this when it's her turn to speak, but what I'm hearing is that there's a concern that if it's a non-catch, or if it's a non-target species that's caught, then there isn't an opportunity to get that animal out of the trap, get it rehabbed or release it or whatever. So there's that piece of it. That's the piece that I'm hearing. And you don't have to respond, but that's
no, that's fine. I'm done. Yeah. Sorry, I mean.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I would say, and I don't think they're 100% effective. And so I would say whether it's a non-target or a target wild animal that you're going for, the sooner you can get back to the trap, if the animal wasn't killed immediately, that's important. I did want to address, we keep talking about the reasons why the trap check times are at 30 days, that there was a decision made apparently in Oregon where this is kind of the way it was, and how it occurred was, I think it was back in 2003, nearly 20 years ago. We were on a work group. It was very, it was actually, I appreciate this work group and how reflective it is, and it is a balanced, and so we're having really good discussion. The previous one was not like that. What came out of that work group were 4 options for the commission to consider, and they chose, it was a different commission in 2003, 2004, to go the route of what I would call the most lax trap check times in the 30 days. That was literally 18 years ago. That doesn't mean these things aren't finite, and we're here hopefully to look at modernizing our wildlife laws. And I want to say, it is, and I do say this with respect, Kevin, but for wildlife services, a federal agency, it seems as though our federal agency is lobbying really hard for lax trap check times for Oregon's wildlife. I do believe if Oregon updated our trap check times for predatory animals, the wildlife services could move in compliance and would have the budget to do so, as they've done in other states. So I just want to acknowledge, we keep talking about, oh, it's just coyotes or it's just this. Well, yeah, that's Oregon's wildlife. We are concerned about coyotes and beavers. And that our 30 days trap check time, it seems to be, it's like almost self-regulation. Everyone's saying, oh, we go back much sooner than that. So we are kind of managed, we've got a policy in place for the exceptions then. And it's the lowest common denominator, and our policies should be more reflective of our values. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks for that, Kelly. Kyle?
Thanks, Jamie. Answering your specific question about why not something less than 30 days. And it also, I think, Kelly, harkens back to the conversation that they had when this was addressed the first time. There's very real economic impacts if you shorten the times. Now, we talked earlier about a balance, and so I'm not saying that any economic impact shouldn't be, should override any of the other things we're talking about here. But consider, right, we're in an industry where labor is incredibly difficult to find. We are already understaffed across the board for our planting crews, trapping crews, obviously. And so if say we reduced the trap check time to half, so 14 days. We would end up having to cover the same piece of ground twice as much. You would stretch out your labor force that much thinner, so on and so forth. Again, just the considerations. You asked why not. And there are very real economic impacts from that perspective. That's just my industry. I think to maybe stick up for Kevin just a little bit, what he's, I think, talking about is that if their check times are reduced significantly, he has a budget right now for where we're at. If he's got to cover the ground twice as much, 4 times as much, they need more people, which means the counties have to pay more, the ranchers have to pay more, and in the places that our folks are utilizing their services, they have to pay more. So to just answer your question very simply, Jamie, the very real answer is it costs a heck of a lot more money, double for each time you reduce the interval.
I can appreciate that, Kyle. Thanks for clarifying it. And I guess I was, just playing off of a little bit of what Kevin was saying about that, and that he said most of the time they're checking traps more frequently. And so that's sort of where I think where Kelly was going with, it's like, and I mentioned this too, it's just like, well, if we turn it the other way, I mean, do we have a policy? I use the, it's the holiday season. So I'll use the parking lot example. So, parking lot at the mall, I mean, is made to accommodate the cars at Christmas time. And the rest of the time it's mostly, empty. And so, they build these parking lots for sort of the worst case scenario. And so I guess I'm wondering, is the 30-day trap check trying to accommodate sort of the worst case scenario as opposed to the most likely or most common scenario? And is there an opportunity to have the trap check reflect that and have some other ability to address those unique or hardship or circumstances that, are less frequent? So I guess that's where at least that's where I'm seeing there's an opportunity potentially to do something different. Drenda?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. And the first, I apologize for if it's already been covered, and just because this is my first meeting, I don't know it. But is there data that stratifies the number of traps over the different types or the timelines, right? Are the majority of traps predatory kill traps that are at the 30-day, or are they more fur bearers restraining traps that are 48 hours? So that's one question. And then the second one, Jamie, is to you. And when you're talking about, what you just mentioned, turning it on its ear for not looking at the worst case scenario or best case, however you want to define it, are you considering, are we still talking about consistency across categories so that it's 14 days, I'm just pulling a day out, 14 days for all, or are we talking specifically about kill traps and taking these one by one? Or are we talking about consistency?
Yeah, so I'll start with that one first. So, I mean, if we were in a room and there were, sort of options on the table, the options on the table are you keep things the way they are. Another option is consistency across the board, regardless if it's predator or fur bearer. So is it, and you've heard 24-hour, you've heard 48, maybe there's something else, I don't know. And then the group has been talking about, maybe there's not consistency given some unique considerations on the predatory side. So maybe that's something different. And you heard Jill talk about 5, 10, something less than 30. So that's kind of, that's the range of options on the table right now. And we're not, we may be narrowing it somewhat, but we're still swirling around those options. The data question, I'm not the person to answer that. And I think, if you go back to the little chart that's in the chat, the 30-day trap check is a kill set for predator animals that's primarily, for damage. And so it's not the fur bearer is 48-hour So that's different. And so we've been really focused on the predator 30-day, and we're at, we have another hour of this meeting. It'd be good to talk about some of the other time categories. But this one does seem to be one that we're really trying to unpack here. So does that help, Brenda?
A little. My question about the data is more along the lines of if all the traps, right, 10% are the predatory kill 30 days, we're spending a lot of time there, and maybe there are fewer animals in that category in those types of traps than in the 7-day or the 48-hour where they're not killed and maybe suffering. That's what I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Or
Yep, I understand your question better now, and I think Kevin does too, which is why I think he raised his hand. So, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't have the benefit of some of ODFW's data at my fingertips, but from off my memory and prior looking at that very analysis, not from the number of traps, but if you look at from the number of animals harvested, there's more animals harvested under the fur regulations, fur bearer harvest, than what Wildlife Services takes. So fur bearer harvest for the species, that we're trapping, there's more, others are removing more than what we remove. Now, there's an unknown harvest amount from individuals that remove predatory animals on their own lands that aren't reported if they're taken outside of fur season. And so that's an unknown, but from what is reported, fur harvest outweighs what Wildlife Services does. So I think that kind of gets to your point that you were asking. Is it seems to be there is a lot of more amount removed during fur regulation.
So so let me ask this question about 30 days. Thank you for that, Kevin, for that clarification. So, kind of going off of what Jill was saying, it's just like 5 days, 10 days, what 14, whatever, what is it? I mean, the other part of what Jill said, and Jill, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that she is a commissioner, and really all of you as liaisons, going back to your groups. I mean, you need to be able to articulate why a 30-day trap check time on a predator side is necessary in a compelling way for the public to support. And so that's something that we've heard that, even Kevin, you said, it's just like, 30 days sounds terrible. And, that's the policy that we have to address a certain set of circumstances around, trapping in a certain geography of our state. But if we're going to do something different, or if we're going to keep things the way they are, this group needs to think about, well, what are we saying that's compelling to the broader public about why we're not doing something different? It does seem like there's an opportunity here to do something different and account for those other circumstances that are less likely and cost a lot of money or are unique to a particular geography. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I'm pushing on you guys to really think that through and see if there's something there. Tyler?
Yeah, maybe you can help me clarify here. I think what you're saying is very similar to what I was asking that this group do in the very beginning of this meeting, right? Lay out for this group why these intervals are where they are, so that we can all understand why they are where they are. How is that different than what you're saying now?
Well, I think we've been talking about that, and what we've heard, or what I've heard, is one of the reasons why they are the way they are is to account, is that to account for geographies in the state where we have don't have the road density, or we have particular topography or conditions that make it very challenging to address, to check traps in a shorter period of time, number one. Number two, they occur in geographies where, again, with those same considerations, but also where there are a range of calls to APHIS in particular to address in a particular given time. So they're pulled in a lot of directions, so they don't have the resources or the people. And so those are a couple of the reasons that I heard as to why the 30-day exists. And what I was pushing back on was, it sounds like that the whole policy is crafted to address some certain circumstances in a particular part of the state. And is there a way to flip it and make it so that it's a trap check time that would work for the majority of incidences in the majority of the state? And maybe there's a hardship clause or condition or something that allows, for something different to happen in those smaller instances in those parts of the state that need more time because there's more space or whatever. So that's where I'm at. Do you understand what I'm saying, Tyler?
Of course, yeah. I just see a bunch of sticky notes here. I guess my brain wants to see, a concise paragraph as to why intervals are what they are and why Wildlife Services needs to retain these intervals if they do, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with your request, right? Is that if these intervals stay the same, right, we as a group need to be able to defend why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so we've heard from Kevin the reasons I've just stated. I don't know if there were other reasons, Kevin. I'll give you a chance to catch your breath. And then we also heard, Kelly and Quinn and talking about that they've seen APHIS tool up in other states to address shorter trap check times on the predator side. So what's different about Oregon? And if there are some things that are different about Oregon, then how do we account for that? And so I think that's the place that I think we're a little bit stuck. So I don't know, Kevin, if you have anything, words of wisdom or any information to help us with that piece of it, or, is there somebody, I don't know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I'm not quite sure how to get unstuck from this piece.
Good question as far as the stickiness. I mean, from a Wildlife Services perspective, kind of getting to Quinn's statement, Wildlife Services falls, under regulatory guidance. And so we follow state laws and local laws and ordinances, and we work within the state agencies. So as states have implemented different trap check intervals in their locations, Wildlife Services is abiding by those requirements. So that's our response. We will, follow what the state gives to us in requirements. So I can't, say more than that. And so when you talk about someone assuming they know what we can afford, I would say that you're a little outside the wheelhouse. I mean, we will adapt, but that will be, much like we do right now. If we receive a cut in funding, it's a reduction in the amount of the services that we're able to provide. But we'll have to abide by whatever requirements are set forth for the state. There's been a lot said, so if you got a specific question, perhaps maybe restate your question if there's something that you want me to address.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tyler was wanting to hear a little bit more specifics about why the 30-day, would be, sort of what are the talking points around if it were to stay a 30-day. But what I'm hearing you say, Kevin, is that, really the decision is the state's to make, with information from you. But whatever the state decides, the APHIS will abide by that.
Yeah, correct.
Kyle, your hand went up and then it went right down.
So it's really, as others have said, this, going to the commission, and there's a public involvement process for the commission to be able to hear from the public what their values and interests are. And that is a range from the public, and that's from private industry as well as private individuals, organizations. And so it's a process to be able to hear what all the values are coming from, the various resource groups and individuals in the state. We've certainly been talking about just, the questions asked to me is, well, what is the value of 30 days? And I said, well, efficiency and effectiveness to be able to address the conflicts that are given to us.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. Kyle, your hand went down. Did you still want to?
I think I made the point. I just didn't want to oversimplify, wildlife services ability to bolster their ranks. And if, I mean, it's just not that simple, right? The counties pay for wildlife services. The producers pay for wildlife services. We ran bills in Douglas County and Coos County to try and make it so that the users themselves could pay for wildlife services, and it got blocked. So we can't oversimplify it, Jamie, that simply shortening the trap check times just means wildlife services will get bigger the way they did in other states. Their budget is fought tooth and nail. And if they can't grow, then the producers will suffer. The county's fiscal impact statements will increase. I just don't want to oversimplify that impact. Yeah. I'm not saying, again, because I'm talking to you about the trade-offs here, but let's just not oversimplify that they can just go poof and get bigger. Because all we have seen in the state is that they are constricted.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm responding to is I hear that the majority of the time it's less than 30 days. And so if most of the time, you know, it's less than 30 days, what is that? And if there does need to be something to address hardship or unique circumstances, what is that? You know what I'm saying? That's where it feels like that's the space in terms of trying to figure out something different with 30 days.
Jamie, I just trying to work a thought here, and I hope it's not too pieced together, but in some of the comments that I've heard as far as trying to determine, you know, what tool or you can implement, or what trap interval, are you going to check this more frequently? And that's, you know, what you were just stating. Every time that we go to, you know, a situation, we respond, is we're going through that whole decision process of trying to evaluate, well, what is the damage? What is the risk? Is it perceived? Is it real? You know, what are the options available to that individual landowner producer? Well, what can they do? What can they improve? What can we do to support them? Or what are the things that are best left for us to do? And all those things are taken into consideration. So if we have a perceived higher level of risk of a non-target catch, or, you know, more public appearance or more public interaction, you know, any of those hosts of circumstances, those are the things that we kind of build into this little matrix of making a decision of how we operate. And when we would decide to use one tool versus another, or to use a tool and to check it on, you know, a daily basis. You know, in some cases, like I said before, in examples where it's morning and night, sometimes it's multiple times during the day. So, you know, those are things that are built into practice, you know, in doing the job professionally. But yeah, how do you put a binding on that? That's really hard to put, you know, bind that all together and put that together and build a matrix, a decision model that is going to work in you know, decision after, you know, circumstance after circumstance. I think that, you know, makes it even more challenging and even more murky than where you're at. But unless others have thoughts on that, I see that as a challenging prospect.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, what I'm hearing though is that the norm is significantly less than 30 days. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out is the whole policy is crafted to allow for as much as 30 days. And if the norm is significantly less than 30 days, if that's the norm, if that's where the majority of the work is happening, then is there a way to allow an exception or a clause or something for those circumstances that fall outside of that, you know, as opposed to everything being 30 days, which, you know, you're hearing from people in the group saying, you know, that's a problem. And you're even hearing from people in the group, you know, who are on the trapper or landowner side saying, you know, there's a public image problem with that as well. And we don't really have all of the reasons to justify why, you know, we're doing that. And so if you turned it on its ear and said, you know, most of the time it's always this because of all these reasons, but, you know, occasionally this happens, and then we have this exception that we allow, but it's really a small number. It seems like that's where you want to be. But I'm trying to channel what the group is talking about here, and we're at 3:45, and we've made a little progress, I think, to understand this, but I don't see a concrete proposal on the table of something that we could chew on other than 24 hours and 30 days, which is what we started with. So is there, Jill has put out some other timeframes, and I've posed this a couple of times about, is there something that we can adjust this so that we're, it's more speaking to the norm, most cases, but it doesn't sound like people are biting on that. So I don't know if someone has some other suggestion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to provide the clarity and respond to the question. So the group needs to be the one to respond to proposing their ideas.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've heard consistency across categories. So, there's 20, I mean, it's put on the table 24 hours, a consistency across categories, on the predator side. So, what are people thinking about that? And if you want to do something different, why? What would that be? Or if you want to keep it the same, what are those compelling reasons? Like Jill said, tell us what the reasons are, as to, so we can talk to the public about why it's important to keep it 30 days. That's, what we're trying to unpack here. Jill?
It seems like a lot of things have been, a lot of people have talked about more or less species specific trapping. So most of the kill trapping is done for specific species. Maybe not all, I don't know. I don't know if you snare coyotes in such a way that you kill them immediately. That would seem to be a little hard, but there's, with kill traps, there may be some very specific species that there would be exceptions for not frequent checking. For other species with other types of traps, obviously, and that's in the rules right now, there's shorter time periods. So with the kill traps, we may have specific species that we're targeting for kill traps. And we're not targeting them for fur. We're not targeting them for meat. So, as long as the traps are set appropriately, then there may be some shorter time periods for certain species and longer ones for others. Nobody's ever talked about that. It's been very general talk about, except for Kyle talking about conibears in the forests, but conibear traps, that those type of things might be able to narrow down the types of interval times as well.
So who can help us with Jill's question about animal types? Is that an ODFW?
Nobody wants to go there.
I know, nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to go anywhere, Jill. That's the.
So
Go ahead, Brian.
Jamie, I can speak to a little bit. We, for this topic, the 30-day kill traps, we are talking about a pretty narrow suite of species. It's the predatory animal species. And so there's only you have the rodents. And I think that's a lot of what we heard from Kyle. We have coyotes. We have just a handful of species really that these kill traps are being used for take both damage and then otherwise. And maybe I'll let Shannon jump in here. I see she's got her hand up.
I'll jump in, but I'm not.
I was gonna say, maybe Shannon raised her hand too soon. Should have let Brian keep going. Go ahead, Shannon.
No, I think we need to clarify the question, because I did hear what Jill said, but I'm struggling in the last like 30 minutes of this conversation about how we take a policy and we want more consistency. So we want to shorten a time, but then we want to make carve outs for other, and we're starting to get into, well, what types of animals and what time. Isn't that already the problem we're trying to go through here? So what do you want to look at with these species and these times? And as Brian just described, predatory animals is defined in statute. With a kill trap, it's 30 days. So what are we carving out of that to consider?
I don't know that Jill has an answer to that question. I think she was just raising it as, is that a possible path, you know, to go to look at species. I think the pathways in front of us are, you know, we've got everything from 24 hours to 30 days. We haven't really, I mean, we've floated. There's some people that put some other ideas out there. People haven't taken a bite. You know, there's this idea of consistency across categories. We haven't really, you know, unpacked, okay, well, what does 24 hours across all categories, you know, look like, or 48 hours or whatever. But we're focused on that 30-day predator side and how we can unpack that. And is there something we can do differently that we think might be more palatable to the public, but also, you know, allows the work of damage control to continue in a way that's economically viable? I mean, I think that's what we're, you know, trying to solve here. That it feels like that's the issue we're trying to address. Kevin, and then Kelly.
And if Kelly wants to go, I don't want to dominate. I just was going to respond to Jill's statement and about specifying some differences. And at least from my understanding, I think that's where we're at, is whether it's for what we refer to as the quick kill traps on the 30 days, or if it's for a foothold trap, a restraining trap for predatory animals. Again, you're talking about just those few species. And so everything, all the other species on a restraining trap is going to be 48 hours. So that's the general rule. So almost all the species are going to be 48 hours. And so you already have a rule that pretty much makes it fairly generalized and consistent across the board for species. They're just, whether they're called a fur bearer, whether they're an unprotected mammal. And so the carve out, as Shannon used that word, you're talking about coyotes of those rodents on private property when there's damage. And so that's where that, you know, that becomes a different subject. So I'm kind of curious to hear from Jill if there's more ideas to that, if she had other ideas, or if she's just wanting the group to kind of massage that. Because from what I understand, that's how it's already shaped, is that there is a uniform time frame and there's a special clause for just a small subset.
Yeah, I was just trying to play off of what Jamie was talking about, of what, you know, where there's certain situations like topography, or, you know, and I was just bringing it down to individual species, like, you know, rodents that have very specific habitat that is a problem in rough habitat, something like that, like the mountain beaver. I was just bringing that up to get people to start thinking about how this 30 days just looks, we've already talked about this, pretty bad even for kill traps. If we're also snaring coyotes in such a way as to try to strangle them or kill them fairly quickly, then it's likely in that type of situation, I would imagine you might wind up with a dog, or, you know, even a cat. So, so there's certain animals that you're trying to use a kill device with that might wind up having more negative impacts on other species than, for instance, you know, drowning an animal, all these things sound really horrible when we're talking about them. But anyway, so how can we narrow this down? I understand, okay, 30 days is only for predatory species, but some of those predatory species are usually have to be acquired, trapped, or whatever in different ways than other of those predatory species. And some of those may have more consequences to other non-target species. So how can we work through this 30-day?
Thanks for that clarification, Jill. Kelly, and then Brian.
I actually had a question. I don't think I was fully aware that there is kill traps set for coyotes on land where a trapper doesn't have to check them on private land for 30 days. Could somebody ODFW or Wildlife Services talk a little bit more about how many that is and what those traps are? Are those the next snares? Okay. And so that's a 30-day trap check time for coyotes. Okay. That's really bad. Okay.
And that's
Brian.
go ahead, Brian. Jump in, Brian, and then I can respond.
Yeah, and so it's 30 days for kill traps and snares for predatory animals. And so there are snares that are used for coyotes that are a choking snare.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to bring up and just to clarify is when we're talking about this 30 days, as it's currently worded, it's a 30-day trap check, predatory animals, kill traps and kill snares, but it's not specific to private property. And so when we look at the restraining traps for predatory animals, which we'll be unpacking in a little bit, we do have that carve out that has a difference between predatory animals in general, whether they're on public or private land. And then we have more flexibility for private lands when addressing damage. And so with the kill traps and snares, that carve out's not there.
So the trap check time would be what then on public land?
The 30 days. If it's a kill trap or snare set for an animal defined as predatory animal.
So then it sounds like the question is, do we want to continue to retain this carve out for coyotes and rodents to allow for that 30 days? I mean, that seems like that's the question. If we already have 48 hours for everything else, and there is this carve out for coyotes and predator animals, do we want to retain that, and why? And what would happen if that went away?
I would say no, but I don't think you were asking me. Okay,
Asking the group.
Okay.
Kyle?
Yeah, I like to answer your easy questions. Yes, I would like to maintain some form of carve out for predatory animals beyond the 48 hours.
And why?
Well, it's the reasons we talked about substantially, the financial impacts, the labor impacts, efficiency impacts. They've talked a lot about how wily some of these coyotes can be, right? I mean, and it takes time, trap soak time and all that kind of stuff to get them, especially when they're working over your lamb herd. And so for a whole gamut of good reasons, that carve out exists now, and we need to maintain that to some level.
So you just opened that little door, Kyle. So is it 30 days? Is it 10 days? Is it 5 days? Is it?
Well, I negotiated for a long time with loggers, Jamie, and I never gave my number first.
I can understand that. Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out, can this group figure out a path forward that is supported by this group, that the public could understand, that's different from what is there today? Or, does this group, or if it's going to retain the way it is, what are the reasons why? And, what, 2 hours ago now, I said, there's an opportunity in this forum to develop a different set of a path forward, given all the interest and expertise that you all have. But at the end of the day, if you can't get there, then there are other forums for you to work in, to try to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. So, just to be blunt, we've got a half hour left of this particular meeting. Like I said at the beginning, I'm hopeful and optimistic. I feel like I've pushed you really hard today in trying to figure out, is there some movement, between 24 and 30? And, I'm not hearing a lot of support among the whole group for a lot of movement around that. And so, we have to figure out, what that means. I don't know that everybody wants to have another 2.5 hour meeting focused on 30-day trap time if we haven't been able to make a lot of progress, here with this one. So I'm just being blunt here.
Yeah, as I'm trying to think through it, Jamie, it's hard, right? We represent different elements of the equation, right? So something that we might be able to make work might be different than what Kevin can make work, might be different than the rancher in Malheur County make work. And it's hard to feel like you can give that rancher in Malheur County away right now without I don't know, without some more consideration.
So what would that consideration be?
I don't know.
Because it does seem like there is a recognition that certain parts of the state pose a hardship, but that's not the norm. And so that's the piece of, it's like, well, what do we do with that? And if there's more resources that are needed, how do we address that? If you're trying to manage a hardship, for certain parts of the state and certain land managers, and balance that with animal suffering and public perception, that's what we're trying to do here. So any and all suggestions are welcome. Sam's been populating the whiteboard, and it's really been, if you stopped and took a look at it, there's some information in here about, it's really just reflective of the conversation that we've had. And it does seem like that this space where we're really stuck is how do we allow for this contingency in particular parts of the state but that isn't the norm. Jill, go ahead.
I can't answer that question, but I have a question. We've talked a lot about conibear traps, but are there other traps that are used for rodents that are kill traps? And other names of traps?
So, yeah, so a lot of your traps for rodents, if you're talking about even like a rat snap trap, that's a quick kill trap. A lot of your mofer or goal traps are quick kill traps. And so I think Jill, was that what you're asking?
I'm pretty familiar with those, but
yeah.
The others for wildlife, other wildlife that are that are rodents. Well, I guess mountain beavers aren't actually rodents, so I guess it'd be rodents and lagomorphs and whatever mountain beaver are. So
your conibear is your most typical trap that is used, is typically referred to as a quick kill trap. But your quick kill trap, your killing type trap, could be your neck snares, as we referred to earlier. I mean, so there's just general categories, whether there's lots of brands and various, models of them, but those are your general designs.
So for, say, are there conibears big enough to kill a beaver?
Yes.
Okay. And lagomorphs, are they typically snared?
Honestly, I don't know who spends their time trying to trap rabbits or lagomorphs. I don't know that. It's certainly not something on our radar that we spend our time doing. I don't think that's really on most people, other than, hey, I got a rabbit that's getting in and eating my lettuce, and they set a trap for it. From other private industries, I don't know how many people are addressing some type of rabbit damage. That would be a question for, wildlife control operators.
Okay. So it's typically beaver and mountain beavers and
nutria.
Yeah. Well, and then I guess there's not a lot of rats out in the, wildlife area unless they're native rats, but that people are going to be wanting to trap. I'm just trying to find out, is there a way to siphon off, again, a type of trap versus another type of trap for these intervals for kill traps?
Yeah, so I think I think there's the type of trap, there's the species. Those are two different ways to look at it. And then I think there's, geography or unique set of circumstances is another way. I'm struggling along with all of you to try to figure out, is there a path forward? And I guess, can somebody answer Jill's question about could there be a carve out for types, or could you set the standard around type of trap versus species? So that would be one thing interesting to hear you talk about. And then the other thing that I'm wondering about is kind of going back to that consistency question that Kelly raised, right out of the chute early on, is that, is there a way to provide a consistent trap check time, across categories, and have the onus be on the land manager to apply for like a hardship, sort of like a non-conforming, use or something like that. I know, Stan, this came up a little bit in the beaver work group, and I know that there's some protections, or not protections, but there's some language around, that limits people's ability to have it be the onus on the person to. I'm not stating it very well, Stan. You know what I'm talking about. We talked about this in the beaver group. But I'm wondering if on the trap check side, is there a way, to make it so it's standard across the board for the majority of cases, majority of landowners, so there's certainty for everybody and it's clear. But then if something has to be done differently, can there be like a non-conforming or an exception or something kind of some sort of process to allow some differences because of road density, because of geography, because of, a huge uptick in a particular predatory species that's causing problems. I'm totally, just out there, just trying to put something on the table that might be a different way to look at it. So there's two things there that I put on the table. One is this idea that is emerging in my head. I don't even know if it's possible. The other is the question to address that Jill brought up about, is there a path forward around looking at trap types? So those are two things. Jim?
From a fur bearer standpoint, we don't want to see the regulations get too complicated. I mean, an example is some of the fishing regulations. Go out and go fishing and you think you're doing it right and you're not, so the simpler the better, and when you start trying to say, 48 hours for this animal and 24 for this one, or something like that, that's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think that there is some, agreement in the group around, consistency and simple is sort of where, is where people would like to land. And that's where, I'm, and Kevin had talked quite a bit about, hey, the majority of the time on the predator side, we're checking a lot less than 30 days, but we do have these extenuating circumstances, and that's why that 30-day exists, is to give us an ability to address those unique circumstances. And like Kyle said, you don't want to throw that rancher under the bus. I mean, I'm managing I'm that rancher that's managing a 1 million acre ranch down in southeastern Oregon. I don't have a great road density, and I see a surge in coyote population that's going after my calves. I mean, what are my options there? It's going to cost me a whole bunch of money to get a bunch of folks out there to check traps every 24 hours, or can I apply for some sort of hardship that allows for a different length of time? Just to put a fine point on it. So that's where I'm testing the waters here to see if that's even palatable. But I have to say, I'm concerned that if we can't make it, if we can't come up with something that the group feels like they could support around rolling back the 30 days, when I've heard across the board from a lot of people that, that sounds really bad, but what are we going to do about it? I'm just a little bit concerned about making headway on some of the other trap check intervals as well. So just starting to feel a little less hopeful. So I'm interested what people think about that idea of, consistency across the board, normal, so it's simple, straightforward, but putting and this is Stan, where I'm looking at you, is putting the onus on the land manager to apply for something that's unique for their circumstances to allow something different to occur. Well, I'm asked, Sam just reminded me that Stan is the alternate, and so I appreciate, Stan, that you haven't unmuted. And the only reason why I keep looking at Stan is because this came up on the Beaver side, and he had some language there, but Kevin Blakely, I think, can answer that question too, or Shannon. There was some language in the OARs that says that, I don't remember what the language was, but Kevin, Shannon, maybe you recall what we talked about in Beaver.
Yes, sorry, I can't recall from Beaver management where you're going, but I will tell you, I've been trying to search because it's under ODA's authority. So while we can set trap check times, I'm getting a little nervous about saying we have the authority to permit something as far as management goes without going and looking at the statutes. And Kevin Blakely, sorry, I have to call out my last name so we don't get confused. If you want to weigh in here and let me know it's not an issue, that's fine. But I probably need to go dig that up. And I get where you're going at. So if you set it at 14 days, 7 days, something like that, and then by special permit, you could have an extension on checking kill traps. I mean, it's not outside the realm of regulatory possibility, but I'm concerned about ODA's authority versus ours to issue it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I always, we always look to the group to come up with these kinds of ideas, but we all seem to be a little bit stuck here. So that's why I was trying to figure out, is there some other angle? Kevin?
Yes, Kevin Blakely. So I think the discussion in Beaver management was really around, under the statute, the trap check times for predatory animals. It literally directs the commission to they can define that reasonable time period. That's the way the statute reads in for predatory animals, those defined as predatory animals. For fur bearers, it is defined as, at least every 48 hours. So you could shorten it, but you can't lengthen the 48 hours. For the predatory animals, it really is about that trap check interval. And I agree with Shannon, you're starting to get a little bit complicated when you're talking about via species, that sort of thing. We certainly already have the bifurcation between private lands and public lands in just by the way things are defined. So you could use that. You could use that as a framework, but it really is about a reasonable time frame, and that's what the group is really contemplating right here.
Kelly?
Oh, yeah. When we're talking about these exceptional circumstances that happen, I kind of thought we're talking more about, there's circumstances that arise, maybe, so it's the weather or whatever that might be. So if somebody checks their trap after the actual trap check time, I'm assuming there's a lot of variables that play into enforcement where an officer would consider these various situations. So I guess I don't know if we're going down a path where we're asking for like a landowner to get a special permit to like not check their trap for a longer period of time. That just seems complicated and super uncomfortable. I couldn't tell if that was like the exceptions, but I have to say right off the bat, when I think about trap check times for coyotes in neck snares, these are considered kill traps. I just wanted to propose this, moving them closer to where the fur bears are, so that they no longer fall within that 30-day. These are on land. These are set for coyotes. These are not submerged in the water. Is that my understanding? So I have to say, I think for all the times that we've been involved in this, it's one of those areas that just seems that's really in the shadows, that there is this now exception. So for coyotes, it's 96 hours to 7 days to 30 days. 30 days, that's for, setting a trap that's on land that potentially no one's going back to. It's so, it is indiscriminate, and it can catch non-target animals, including a coyote that is there languishing for potentially 30 days. So I just wanted to say, can we talk about those that are 30 days that are on land? Or is that when you start parsing out the different kinds of traps and the ways in which they're in the species in which they're caught for? Anybody? And I'm not on mute, right? You guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
No, okay, it's fine. I just wanted to, is that a place of movement? I was just asking.
Yeah. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep tooting my horn here. We are speculating that these types of traps may be more prone to non-target species, but that's something I, from a conservation standpoint, would like to know more about. Like, so does ODFW or anyone have any data to show that these coyote snares may be more prone to bycatch?
So as far as answering the question of non-target catch, when I referred to catch rate, a non-target catch rate of just 2% of our catch, that was for all trapping methods, which includes neck snares. And so when we say 1% approximately is released, so those would be restraining traps. And not all some of the animals that aren't released are animals that, like a nutria. If we catch a nutria in a trap, we don't release a nutria, even if it's a non-target, because it's an invasive. Sometimes an opossum is in the same boat. Or you have other animals that, if I'm trapping a coyote protecting lambs, but the producer also has raccoons getting into his corn, or he also has his skunks are spraying his guard dogs, and those animals are found in traps. That's not the intended purpose of why I was setting the trap to protect the sheep. But he's like, I'm also having conflicts with those species. So some of those other species are not released in a restraining trap for that purpose. So that percentage includes the use of neck snares. And so when I refer to the selectivity and efficiency of using a neck snare, it's the same as we were referring to in like using a conibear. It's very selective. And again, the risks are there, but we're not taking all risk out of it. You can't do that.
And I want to be really clear. It's not just a concern about non-target. It's also a concern about the length of time and a target species is caught in a trap under. Yeah. So I just wanted to be clear about that, and including coyotes.
Absolutely. No,
Okay.
no, I appreciate you clarifying that, but I clearly understood. Yep. Same concern. And that's, again, getting back to the statement when we're evaluating, the scene when we arrive on site, we're looking for all those cues. We're using a very lightweight snare cable so that it is fast and effective at humanely dispatching them quickly. But it's so much, that they can actually break out of it if they fight for it for a long time. So it's counterproductive for us. We wouldn't be doing that if it was counterproductive. As I said earlier, we don't want to lose an animal that's causing damage. And so we're taking those things very cautiously into consideration. We don't want, our employees don't want to see an animal suffering. I would say probably every one of our employees, if not all of them, but almost all of them, have their own animals, whether those are livestock, whether they're family pets. It's something that is very much in the forefront of their mind when they're addressing wildlife, is they have a great respect for wildlife. And so they don't want animals to suffer. And so those are things that we take into due consideration with neck snares, as well as all the other equipment.
So we have 5 minutes left with our meeting today. I do want to say that I think everybody, and speaking just on behalf of myself, appreciate so much everybody's candor. I think that folks were very honest and authentic in putting forward, their concerns. I think that there was a lot of silence in the meeting, in part because this is a challenging topic, and we're trying to figure out how to address it. We spent the whole time on the 30-day, and if there was some space or movement or ability to move in that. I didn't see agreement around I didn't see agreement around consistency, but I did hear agreement around simple is better. And there were some options put out there, but it doesn't sound like people really took a bite around that. So our next meeting is January 6th. And I'm going to just pose it out here for everybody. Do we want to get back together on a couple things. One is I want to recognize that we haven't had this level of dialogue at some previous meetings. And so, I think there was a lot of dialogue here that was, some of it was covering previous ground. Some of it was a little bit new. I think there's some ideas here to give people some food for thought, and maybe some things that people need to go back and sort of check or test or do a little bit more research around. And so that being said, it seems like it would be worthwhile to come back together in January, because I did know that at the end of this meeting, we were going to check and see, did the group want to come back together? Do we feel like there's, some momentum that we could be able to get closer if we start talking about some of the other categories? So I'm just going to put that out there and see, we could just do a thumbs up, around the board. Who would be in favor of coming back together for a meeting in January, building on the conversation we had today, looking at some of the other categories and seeing if there's any movement. If so, just put your thumbs up if you're willing to do that. And you can keep them up so everybody can see.
Yeah, and Jamie, I would just throw in, you asked me earlier, how would that consideration happen? I feel like a lot of it's a big producer conversation, and Lauren wasn't able to be here at all today, and so
Yeah.
you know, she needs to be able to represent her folks.
Yeah. So I think I saw thumbs up from everybody. If there's anybody that didn't put their thumbs up, if you want to just share what your concern is or let me know, but I didn't see anybody without a thumbs up. So Quinn, go ahead.
Well, first I want to say that I'm certainly open to having more discussion if it's fruitful, right? I guess for me, understanding whether or not it would be helpful to hear from, Commissioner Zarnowitz and Wall about, what is the commission's plan with kind of in the aftermath of this work group, if we kind of understand what it is if there's a recommendation. Well, what happens if there's not a recommendation, right? I mean, does it just get thrown out to the public in a regular rulemaking and it comes from the agency? I just want to understand kind of what happens next from your perspective, especially given, what you're seeing here in this, I think, there's definitely a divergence in viewpoints here and not a lot of wiggle room. So I don't know, give us some incentive to keep coming to the table, threaten us, do something.
Well, Commissioner Zarnowitz should actually have the floor first on this one. I'm happy to take that role if she prefers.
I'll just, if we come back to the commission in January, February, March, and have no resolution on this, I expect it will come back up at the next trap setting time period commission meeting. I'm not sure that we would make, and maybe Mary could address this, but I'm not sure that we would actually be going to make a decision at that time.
And what I would add is, thank you, Commissioner Zarnowitz. What I would add is that as I read the tea leaves with the commission, not with this group, but with the commission, this issue is ripe. It came to the commission, people wanted to get recommendations. I applaud the effort to have a balanced group, and we do have one. And one of the risks of that is that we get a divided answer or no answer. That's sort of the worst outcome for us, but I can't see this one going away. So I guess I would urge people to put proposals forward and seek a proposal to the commission. The commission may just say, I haven't thought this, you can tell by the way I'm stumbling around, I have not thought through what the commission will do if there is no recommendation. But one of the options at our disposal would be to say to staff, there isn't a proposal, we want one from you, and then we can vote on that one. So it doesn't necessarily serve anyone well to not have a proposal coming out of this group. So I guess I'm begging, come up with a really solid proposal coming out of this in recognition of everything that's in front of us.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks for that, Mary and Jill. So we're at 4:30. We've already lost Brenda. So we'll get back together in January. What I would ask you to do is, we covered a lot of ground around the 30-day trap check today. I think we did uncover a little bit more deeply some of the barriers or challenges. And there are several options on the table. And one thing that I did hear from all sides is simple is better. So there is that word consistency, there's the simplistic, there's the, and there's allowing for those unique circumstances, and how do we address that? We'll send out the meeting summary, of course. We'll send out the whiteboard with all of the ideas. And in large part, I think we're really struggling here in large part because, you know, there isn't an easy answer. There is a lot to unpack. And if people like, you know, Kyle, I would suggest that, you know, you and Brenda and, you know, go back and like maybe talk with, you know, kind of what are these circumstances? What are these costs that we're trying to allow for? You know, just to see how we can problem solve around those. So that would be really helpful. And then ODFW, we're going to be meeting with you folks soon. I don't know if there's something that we need to be doing on the work, checking out the ODA side, you know, so that we're making sure that we're not moving too far into, you know, getting out ahead of our skis as an agency. So that's something we can talk about when we meet. I think next week we're meeting. So deep breath. Thank you, everybody. This was a really challenging but rich conversation, and I hope you all. Tyler, is there something?
Yeah, just really
helpful
quick.
You want to leave with?
I just want to respect everybody's time with these work group meetings, and I think it's important that I mean, this was kind of our warning, right? Like we need to be ready to have our recommendations from each one of our respective groups. But I think that next meeting we should ask the hard question directly, like, are you willing to move on this interval? And then do the same down the line. And I think that would get us to the finish line a lot faster. But now that we know that may be occurring, and I think you need to say it, Jamie, if this is the way you feel, is that we need to have our ducks in a row for the next meeting. Like I said, just so we don't spend a whole nother meeting on one interval next time. I don't know if I'm an outlier here and others on the call don't agree, but I would certainly like to get to the finish line of this thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that, you know, when we did call the question, I mean, Bob put it out there right in the front of 24 hours across the board consistency. And then we spent the whole meeting talking about whether, you know, what we could do differently from 30 days to 24. And here we are. So I agree with you, Tyler, that Mary and Jill just lit a fire under everybody, you know, to come with more concrete ideas about how to make movement within those categories and why, and then the public, you know, the public side of that. What is how you talk with people about, you know, why things are either changing or why they're staying the same. Okay, that's it.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for your time. Appreciate everybody's participation. Happy holidays. We'll see you in 2022.